Okay, good evening. Am I mic'd up? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, okay. I'm Lewis Blackwell. I'm chairing this evening, Curating Night Culture. It's the last in our series of events that have gone with the Nighttime is the Right Time exhibition, which, as you may have noticed, has disappeared. So this is right at the end of the series. And it's possibly the most exciting mixed group we have here. I think we're a really interesting group of people, many of whom are connected in different ways with the program development. So it's going to be a good evening, I think. And what we'll do is have presentations. Probably no questions along the way unless there's something which is really screaming to be asked right then and there. But we'll have the panel come together at the end and hopefully lots of exchange. Because I think across the 5 speakers, we have the opportunity to really probe and think about what kind of night culture can we develop, how is night culture developed, and where it might go in London. A couple of housekeeping points before we kick into that. We are videoing this evening. We do tend to video the events here. If you have any issues with that, put a paper bag on your head or something, I don't know, but we video things, so I hope you're okay with that. Anything else? Turn your phones to silent. Please tweet if you like and all that kind of stuff. The Wi-Fi is open, but no phones going off. So I'll introduce each speaker. I won't give you all 5 bios right now, but as we go along. And we're going to start with Dipa Joshi. Dipa is director at Assael Architecture. Recently been appointed as design advocate for the Mayor of London's Good Growth Design Programme. And Dipa helped judge the international Nighttime is the Right Time competition, the ideas competition that we ran with the Mayor of London's office, and that was in the exhibition upstairs. And so over to Dipa, please.
Thank you. Take some photos. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with this amazing panel of people. So I come to you from the background of working at Assael for the last 14 years. Assael specialises in mixed-use regeneration, residential-led. So most of our clients are house builders and developers with a really commercial edge. And I'm a big advocate of culture. I always have been, and I found it increasingly difficult through the years to convince them that sites are viable, not only for cultural use, but for affordable workspace use as well. So yeah, a bit about my background. I've been in London. I lived in London for about 25 years. I came here to do my Part 2 in architecture. And I've always wanted to get involved with music. I always wanted to sing. So I joined bands. I was in a band called the Asian Dub Foundation when it first started. Got involved with the Asian underground scene, involved with a club called Anoka and Talvin Singh's Asian underground movement. I also my boyfriend ran clubs, so I was involved with running clubs when I was doing my Part 2, and sort of really went to most places in London in my 20s. And 30s, and in bands I've done gigs at all different types of venues, so really kind of entrenched in that whole scene of, my kind of history in London is one of being thoroughly involved with all of the nighttime spaces throughout the day and the night. Most of these places, unfortunately, have closed down. And all of these wonderful places that make up all the memory and the fabric of our kind of memory of what we do and how we pass our time, how we play, how we pass our leisure time in London have closed down, sadly, and now become great precedent examples. There's a wonderful building at the Turnmills, on the site of Turnmills, where I spent most of Saturday nights researching and thinking through the sampling ideas of my Part 2 architecture project. And now it's this wonderful hit and miss building, which we're using as an architectural precedent, but that's not what we want. We want these places to stay, to remain as part of London's history. So recently, I've been lucky enough to be appointed as one of the Mayor's design advocates. There's a little write-up actually on my LinkedIn on the Assael website about the first day that we had last Monday, which was the beginning of this venture that we're involved with the mayor. And luckily, he is an advocate of culture. And I think it's our duty as designers involved with him to raise the profile of these cultural spaces and to bring forward ideas and to try and make whatever's happening stick. One of the places that I've encountered recently, I live in Wimbledon, found out about this amazing place in Tooting called the Sound Lounge, and the mayor actually mentions this venue in his guidance. Obviously he's from Tooting, and it's, suddenly Tooting came on the map, got this. I went to the opening night, I was like, wow, we've got a Shoreditch in Tooting, it's really happening here on our doorstep. And it's an amazing story of this couple that crowdfunded their space to materialise and take place, and all these lovely people that helped with the decor and got on board and enabled them to provide this wonderful space. It's been open about 7 months. It has a whole series of different types of events, from community to yoga events and loads of music and live music. It's a new grassroots live music venue. But hey, what happened? I went on the website, Save the Sound Lounge. It's already under threat from developers. I mean, I was absolutely devastated. I was doing this research for this presentation last week, and I was like, whoa, get on Twitter and, get on board. Luckily, obviously this is a quite high-profile venue because of its location. The MP was there on Saturday, and there's going to be a lot of lobbying, and, let's hope they can save it. But, this is what happens. Areas become popular, they become cultural, they get an identity, there's a scene, and then obviously there must be a low rent involved with this building, and the developers, the owners have realised they can make a lot more money from converting it to a mixed-use residential-led development. Residential doesn't always go with noisy uses because it costs money to soundproof these uses, or you have to sandwich it with a layer of office space. All of these things add to the cost. So how can we save existing venues? Protect the lease? Yeah, maybe. Protect use designation. Local authorities need to get involved with this. The crowdfunding, maybe crowdfunding ownership. Maybe we can use new technology like the blockchain, and people can actually instead of just crowdfunding the launch of the development, actually own it. Community ownership, is that the way forward? People owning the development would protect from the developers from being able to buy it. And I've just been talking to one of our other panel members about that sort of thing is actually happening. These things are starting to happen. I found this briefing paper, which is quite a new piece of government guidance, which is about protecting pubs. And there's now the ability for local people to actually buy a stake in their local pub and prevent it from being redeveloped. Another thing, all these pubs being lost to development. So we need a custodian of culture. I stole that title from my colleague, actually. She sits next to me, and she did a degree in musical theatre. She's my PA. And she does presentation training in the office now, and she also runs events to help people gel the company together. And her title is now Custodian of Culture. And I thought, this is what cultural activity in London really needs. It needs community ownership. It needs people to get involved who are in authority, and empowered by the GLA maybe, local authorities, regen teams. And then there's a thing that we're involved with, which is actually a small glimmer of hope from the sort of private sector developer led area. So first of all, just a bit about local authorities. I found this scheme in Waltham Forest. So Waltham Forest are one of the boroughs vying to be one of the boroughs of culture, which is part of the strategy in the Mayor's Good Growth Programme. And they're doing quite a lot to try and win. I feel sure that they must, because I see so much that they are doing. One of the things is this pub. So this pub called the Royal Standard was well known to be a place where lots of people in the area meet. It had music venues, lots of famous bands played there, so it had a real history. Closed down in 2011, and this mixed-use development came about. It was going to be a supermarket on the ground floor, but the local authority have got really heavily involved with it and brought it forward as a pub, as a venue, and to have live music. So that will happen. Another thing that they're doing is setting up the night market. And there's a program manager in charge of running this event. They're really proud of it, and it started to happen. Some friends of mine live in the area. They've started to go. It's really opening up their market and bringing it forward as a place to have all day and all evening activity. So build to rent. Within the last 8-9 years, we've become much more involved with this new area of residential development, which enables a lot of people to come on board who rent the apartments, and it's institutionally managed. So it's not just a private developer who builds and then leaves. The business model relies on people coming in and actually buying into a lifestyle. And these renters can vote with their feet. They're private renters. They can go and rent somewhere else if they want. So why rent at their development? The emergence of more of these companies means that there's a competition in the air, and the more competition encourages better quality. So better quality means, what are they getting for their money? Let's see what they can get. They're not renting the apartment, they're renting the whole building, the whole development. And we're seeing an emergence of better quality spaces and better quality management. And that means we get roof gardens with events happening, and we get things like this. So another project in Walthamstow, Ferry Lane, built for Legal and General, who've built into their business model this idea that they want to provide a really good quality lifestyle for the renters. So it's on the edge of a reservoir, as you can see. This is the concept of what goes on in a build-to-rent development. So around the core, you see you have the back of house in grey. You've got the private accommodation. The back of house is all the bits of mechanics that need to make that building work. The residents' private accommodation are the blue areas. The residents' shared areas, which is what they have just for themselves. But the important part is this area at the front, the pink part. And that is the front of house. It needs curb appeal. It needs people coming by, people coming into the development on a daily or weekly basis who might be interested in renting. And it helps their business model. People come by, they see what's going on, they want to move in. So we built that into the design of this development from day one. The pink area is Walthamstow. You can see the station on the right there. On the left is the reservoir, and really building into the public realm, the routes through, the way people are going to actually interact with the scheme from the outset. So the scheme then provides areas where people are going to interact, and this area called the Forum is the front face, is the sort of the open door of the scheme, and that allows a whole kind of range of different spaces. Ground floor space where people can see the reservoir. People are actually filtering through the scheme. The scheme is going to be open to the public every day. There's this area called, this is the Forum, this is our vision for the Forum. And the Forum has event spaces. It's going to have a brewery, pub. It's going to have event spaces which have an outreach to the local community, again, fostered by the local authority. So it's not just the developer doing it for their own sort of philanthropic gain. There's a bit of coercion by the local authority, which has to happen. But it is part of the business model. So, people are going to be coming through. They've got commercial venture. They've also built the soundproofing in, so you've got proper spaces that can operate with noisy, lively environments. And again, it's going to be the life of the scheme. So you've got people, pop-up uses as well, so people can really kind of interact and really kind of get a place to spend their money. All these people, these renters, people coming in, and they've got actually something to spend their money on in the evening to enhance the space, to give them a better quality of life. And that's from the sort of the hard edge of the private sector, a glimmer of hope for culture. Thank you.
Excuse me. So I think I need a bit of help here to get the next presentation up on screen, but we're going to do the questions afterwards. That's okay. And I think there's a good segue to John, who's going to speak next. Our next speaker is John McRae, who's an executive director, co-owner of Orms Architects. And John has led on the 19,000 square metre St Giles project just down the road. Mixed-use space with potentially over 200,000 visitors a day from the station where the crossroads of Oxford Street, Tottenham Court Road, that junction there. And some really interesting night culture as part of a mixed use of that space that John is going to take us through about St Giles. And I think it's another element that we can throw into our sort of mix of potentials for night culture, which we hopefully we can all hold in our minds for the discussion at the end. So over to John.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. As was mentioned, my name is John McRae. I'm a co-owner of Orms. We are a practice based in London, and we cover a range of sectors, everything from office, residential. We're doing a new hotel for the Standard opposite King's Cross. And this has to be one of the most challenging projects that we have and continue to work on. So the scheme that I'm going to take you through this evening has been sort of 7 years in its gestation. We've just started the new build elements on site, and we should be finished Q1 2020. So we've still got a little way to go. In terms of the brief for the site, St Giles, as you'll see in a second, is a fascinating part of London, and it sort of sits culturally, but also in terms of its location at the juncture of a number of different parishes, but also, as you'll see in a second, Crossrail is really cementing its importance. And our client brief, which we worked up with Imagination, who are obviously just next door to this building, was about how we can create a really interesting, dynamic destination that's added to London. Obviously, we'll touch on Timpan Alley and the music heritage that already exists. It's how we can use that, but also use technology in a way that helps to get over some of the music venue issues that I'm sure Rollo will mention later when sound diplomacy are on. And it was to make it accessible to people both culturally, but in terms of age, and also how people want to interact with a building. So in terms of venues, we've sort of highlighted music venues are on the sort of yellowy orange color, and events venues are in the sort of the blue. Now this is actually a reasonably old map, so there are some that have been added, but probably some that have been taken away. And the interesting thing, the yellow dot is where St Giles actually is. So the idea of creating really interesting flexible spaces that could be for events, for launches, but also for music, whether that's in terms of concerts or gigs, we thought is a fascinating place to have it. And obviously it's been well documented about the number of venues that have been either closed or threatened with closure. And I think when we were starting to evolve the brief and thinking for this site, not all of these had actually been closed, but it was becoming more and more prevalent as to the issues that were behind some of these being closed. So in terms of our site, we are the red mark. Just let me see if I can make this work. No. No. Oh. Yeah. So that's our site here. This is Oxford Street, Tottenham Court Road coming down into Charing Cross Road. And the red line is actually the division between Camden on the right, Westminster on the left. But as you can see, there's a number of parishes that sort of come together. And you've got the British Museum here. You've then obviously got Covent Garden, Shaftesbury Avenue to the south. And you can see that that's sort of very interesting linchpin between different areas from the West End through to, as I say, Covent Garden, but then also to the cultural hub to the north, which is the British Museum. And this has been identified by Camden as an area for growth. So you've obviously seen Centre Point is now being refurbished and repositioned. You have Central St Giles. You have the Post building by HMM. We're just finishing this building here on the corner of New Oxford Street and High Holborn. And this link between Tottenham Court Road and High Holborn has become very important. And part of that, and people will say, well, Crossrail coming through London has been part of the wiping out of culture. this scheme is very much at the heart of where Crossrail will be coming in. So for instance, we at Tottenham Court Road intersection, we have the Central Line, we have Northern Line, and we have Crossrail 1, and importantly, Crossrail 2 will eventually be coming into this station as well. So the figures that are banded around, anything from 250,000 to 400,000 visitors per day, Tottenham Court Road is going to be extremely busy. So in terms of our scheme itself, what we have found is that this is Centrepoint here, and then this is the new retail at ground floor that's just been completed. This is now becoming a piazza, and then this is one of the exits that comes out towards our new buildings, buildings A and B, which are the new builds. Off to the side is where the old Astoria used to be, and there's a theatre going in underground here. So just to position you, that's Oxford Street, New Oxford Street, then going up to Tottenham Court Road and then down Charing Cross Road. So the new Foyles is just a bit further down. So our site embraces the former Andrew Board Street all the way down to the south side of Denmark Street. In terms of our scheme, we're on the north side of Denmark Street, so zones, what it's called Zone 1 and Zone 2, and then there's another practice now developing up Zone 3. I will talk about Denmark Street and Tin Pan Alley in a bit, and its cultural sort of significance and value. But essentially, we're creating buildings A and B are new build, as is C, and then this blue zone is a combination of new, refurbished, and additions to existing listed buildings. And we are creating this new red route and cut through between the new Crossrail exit and Denmark Street to the south. So what are we actually creating? So this is building A and B. So this is A and B just to the side of it. So that center point is just off to your right. And this is the new glass box exit from the Northern Line and Central Line. So Denmark Place, which we are reinstating the footprint, is just here. And the idea is that these two new buildings, which are 5 stories above ground, are also 5 to 6 stories below ground as well. So we are actually building over and above the new Crossrail line and the Northern Line ticket hall. So in terms of construction, it's hugely complex. But the idea is above ground that this 4-story space here, these louvers actually, which are 9 meters by 2.5 meters, rotate and actually open up. So this facade, as you come out, will actually be open most of the day, and it reveals an LED skin on the inside of the building. And the idea is that that can be anything from a welcome to London, it can be advertising the occupiers on Denmark Street, so the guitar shops and music shops will actually have a certain amount of airtime within the screens. But also it's about a space that you come back to visit throughout the day. So it may have a retail offer in the morning, it may have a product launch at lunchtime, it may be in gig mode in the evening. So the flexibility of space above and below ground has been really key to our scheme. And the reason that that has been key is that we know that music venues in themselves are generally very difficult to have as a going concern in a business sense. So what we've been looking at is that the scheme both above ground, but also importantly the 2,000 person venue below ground, has flexible digital skin on the inside of the building. So you can have more uses and use it 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's been one of the key things that we've been exploring with our client. And in terms of doing this underground venue is what is called a box and box. So it is acoustically isolated from its structure and its surroundings. So that's important in terms of noise going out, but also that's the Crossrail line running underneath the actual building itself. So it's important in terms of acoustics coming into the space. So this is a very flexible space, and I'll come on to where the former 12 bar was in a second. Then above that, we have a mixture of restaurant on the top and then 2 levels of conference facility. And there's a small 15-bed hotel here. And then the point that was made earlier about separating residential and office, we have some residential units at the top that are separated by 2 layers of office. So it really is a sort of a true mixed-use scheme. So just looking down on that event space, taking away the top of the building, one of the key things has been how this digital skin could actually create a very different experience throughout the day. So as I say, it is about curating it, and we're working with Frame Store, who do a lot of animations for things like the Harry Potter films. They're actually going to curate the space, and they've been looking at ideas such as the PlayStation Championships might be held in that space, and you could have a completely immersive game experience. So it's about how we can use emerging technologies to create a different typology. Then below ground, so this is 3 levels below ground, we have this mezzanine structure, but this flexible space that almost with a flick of a switch, it can become product launch, it can be London Fashion Week, but then it can go into concert and gig nights. So in gig mode, this can have up to 2,000 people within it. Coming back above ground, so this is the St. Giles Piazza, so center point just off to the right. Our buildings then tuck in behind the retained St. Giles High Street facade. So we have retail at the bottom, and then we have a mixture of office and residential at the back of this. And then we've still got the link through from Denmark Street. So this has been part of Camden's vision to have north-south and east-west routes across all major developments in that Holborn growth area. Now, perhaps one of the most contentious areas that we've had to work on is how we take something that's very significant both in terms of history and culture, i.e. Denmark Street, often referred to as Tin Pan Alley. There are a number of things that we have been accused of. There's a number of interesting accusations out there about what we're doing and what we're not doing. We have a planning obligation to have what's called Tin Pan Alley uses. So the Camden Council actually created Tin Pan Alley uses as a definition, which is it has to be either music or music-related uses that happen within Denmark Street. And so we have an obligation throughout the works to keep as many units live as we possibly can during the extent of the works, which, just so everybody understands, that added 14 months to the construction program along Denmark Street, because we have to keep at least 2 next to each other live at any one time. But that's part of our client 25 years ago when he bought the site. He had moved out some of the other uses, such as betting shops, to actually put in some of the guitar shops and music shops that you actually see on that street. It's been historically, you see Elton John, Adele played at the 12 Bar, Ed Sheeran did his first gig at the 12 Bar. It's got interest, obviously. But what we're doing is that we are retaining, this is the north side of Denmark Street, we are retaining all of the facades. The only intervention that we're creating is this one here, where we're creating that north-south route that Camden insisted we have, because if you have a number of people coming out of that exit, they would actually be spilling through the development to try and bring people down into Denmark Street and then beyond. So some of the things that we've had some extensive coverage, all of it hugely positive, as you could probably read. So when we got to a point where the 12 Bar was closing down, we had squatters, we had an interesting time with them. We've been tied into the Save Soho campaign. This building is not in Soho, it's in a completely different parish. So interestingly, some objectors in the outset have actually then removed their names from petitions once they actually understood A, where it was, and B, what we've actually been doing and what we're proposing. And I think this probably ties in quite interestingly to discussions that we had on the back of this. And this is where the GLA and then Sound Diplomacy, we came in contact with them. So probably about 3 years now, on the back of the squatters and the headlines, the GLA called us up and said, what the hell is going on? We keep being told you're doing this, that, and the next thing. Can we come and see you? What became very evident very quickly was that we weren't doing at least 99% of what was being thrown at us. And I think the GLA were actually quite heartened that we were looking at music venues. We were looking at the idea that music venues and culture were extremely important, and especially to that area. And that is where the suggestion of the grassroots music venue came into play. And that's where we've looked at how the former 12 Bar can actually be the home to the British music and the idea of a grassroots venue. So just to position you, this is Denmark Street here, and this is the 17th century forge or smithy that was the former 12 bar. So the 12 bar was 3 buildings connected, and it also had some basement space. Now, in discussion with the GLA, Historic England, and Camden, we discussed the idea of perhaps we could create an underground venue, which was a world-class grassroots venue. So a grassroots venue is anything from sort of 100 to sort of 350 people. It can be slightly larger than that. So the other 2,000-person venue is just to the side here. So the one underneath the smithy would actually be an independent one that can be accessed from Denmark Street, where the former 12 bar was accessed. Now, in order to do that, we had huge discussions about, do we keep the venue above ground, or do we create a world-class venue below ground? So again, in discussions with all of those parties, we came to an agreement that what we would do is actually frame and put a slab underneath the existing smithy and move it temporarily, whilst we then built 3 levels of basement below it. And we're then going to return it back to its exact position within 5 millimeters of where it was originally. So the idea is you create the venue below ground, so you deal with the acoustics below ground, and then the forge, or the space at the front here, can then be used as the lounge bar area. So you can still have that connection with the gigs that you may or may not have been to in the past. So this is about a year ago, where what we've done is this slab here was actually built underneath the building in two parts. And then this framing, which happens either side of the external walls, then have ties going through the mortar. And the idea was to frame the building. And as you can see, there was quite a significant large crane that then moved it literally about the length of this room just to one side. And it's about to be moved back. It's being moved back in about a month's time, because all of the piling is now done. And that slab is actually the final slab. When it goes back on top of the piles, that's it in its final position. And then we excavate below it to create the space. So really, it's about our client has looked at venues and music in a different way. We've been looking at how technology can create greater flexibility, and we can use screen time as a way of generating value. It's not just about the buildings, which then has taken the pressure off the viability of music in itself. So we can put back a grassroots venue. We can put in a 2,000-person venue, which in part is a replacement for the Astoria, which was on the other side. But I think importantly, it creates a venue and destination above ground as well as below ground. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, John. That's an amazing, complex and exciting thing that I'm sure we're going to look forward to seeing in sort of 3 years' time. Next up is a third architect, Carl Turner. Carl is founding director of Carl Turner Architects. He led the creation of Pop Brixton, which is obviously in Brixton, which has transformed a derelict space there next to the Brixton Wreck into a wonderful hive of activity, and brings both work and a leisure space to the area. And his latest venture, Peckham Levels, is going to open soon in October. It's a space which will hold, obviously in Peckham, and will host creative workspaces, regular events, markets, exhibitions, and include a new live music venue. So, Carl, can you explain how you make all that happen, please?
Will indeed. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you about those 2 projects. And I always like to put this slide in just to remind myself as much as anybody else that, I guess, same with John, that not everybody's up for change and not everybody wants development. I guess you have to figure out where you draw that line of whether it's evolution and progress or whether it's a retrogressive step. And I guess there'll never be total 100% agreement on that. But we like to think in Brixton and Peckham that we are offering a partial solution to that problem of how cities evolve. So Pop Brixton was a competition run by Lambeth Council about 3 years ago, and I was lucky enough to win it, or so I thought, and then I realised I was maybe a bit unlucky to win it. But it was really not much of a brief. There was an open site at the back of Brixton, and there was no money, and it wasn't just an architectural competition. It was looking for local organisations or people to come forward with an idea to use the site for 2 or 3 years, to fund it, to build it, to set up an organisation to run it. And really the council wanted to use it as what they called an incubator project in Brixton to look at how they could figure out what type of creative space was missing in Brixton. And there's a huge loss of workspace in Brixton at the moment through permitted development legislation, with lots of places like the Piano Factory being turned into residential. So we came up with this idea of a kind of mixed campus of lots of different activities based around a shipping container, trying to make it work over 3 years. And I'm quite unusual for an architect, I suppose. I've built lots of things myself, so I figured the only way I was ever going to be able to build it affordably was to actually be the builder, which I duly was. And then I started conversation with various local people, and we set up a social enterprise called Pop Brixton to actually to run it and manage it. So we don't pay any rent to the council, but we've got a 50-50 profit share with them. But we've got a huge service level agreement with them where we've got a big list of social enterprise stuff that we have to do, a lot of it based around training and mentoring. So our first training and mentoring was to train a group of local young people, youngish people from Lambeth Construction College in construction skills, all paid London living wage for a few months, many of whom then went on to get jobs with some of the subbies they were working with. And I guess really what we set out to do was to create really an undesigned space, a space that would really fit into this kind of market end of Brixton, and to sort of feel like it had been there for a long time. We wanted something that felt organic and something that could take a lot of change and growth, because really we had no idea who the actual end users were going to be when we were building it. We worked with Ili Kishimoto, a local Brixton-based fabric designer who did the fabulous wallpaper decoration when it first opened. And really, I think a lot of, probably Pop Brixton's really known for all of the kind of slightly hipsterish bars and cafes and all of that good stuff at the front of the site. But for me, the important bit all happens at the back, which is where all the social enterprise and where all the training happens. And about 2/3 of the site is actually kind of studio spaces, and there's a co-work space. There's a community garden. We've got a community fridge now that hands out food from local businesses. It's just there in the fridge. Anybody can take it in sort of lieu of a food bank. So a lot of really, really good stuff is going on. And really, there's a sort of daytime Pop Brixton. There's a nighttime Pop Brixton. It probably operates about 14 hours a day. So we've got things like the Impact Hub, which is a separate social enterprise that we made a space for, and they've got nearly 200 members now. So that's a kind of co-work desk space, and they do a lot of really great outreach work with people in Brixton. So we kind of subsidise the rents for lots of organisations like this. We've got Bounce Back at the top there, so they teach painting and decorating skills. They get day release prisoners from Brixton Prison, and this is a base for them in Brixton to reintegrate them back into the local community. Our office was based there for a while, so there's lots of office spaces. And really, we sort of operate a system where it's what you can afford to pay. So we paid some of the highest rent on the site because we could afford it. And then that supports the social enterprises and charities. So it's a really quite a complex matrix. So it has to make a profit, but we try and talk about an optimized profit rather than a maximized one. So effectively, we're sort of paternalistic landlords. But I guess really it's all about the creative opportunity that lots of young entrepreneurs and people get that probably wouldn't get that opportunity otherwise. We've got other organisations like Represent Radio who came from Peckham. They were about to be evicted from their space, and they teach about 400 kids a year in radio skills, but really it's a way of getting to them, teaching them how to sort of have some self-confidence and to write CVs and apply to jobs. So a lot of really great stuff going on. But really, I guess at night time, in the evening, that's when, if daytime is the kind of Brixton people's time, I guess people from Brixton do come here in the evenings, but also it draws in a much wider pool of people from London and actually from all over the world. I've had emails from people all over the world saying that they've been to Brixton especially, or they came to London, and one of the key things they wanted to see was Pop Brixton. So, you know, it's, we have a license for the whole site, so we're the licensee, and we rent space, and we've got a kind of matrix of fixed rents and profit shares. So we count the people on site, and we have a kind of geared rental ratio. So the more people we drive to site, the higher the profit share we get from the tenants. So we're trying some really innovative ways of working. We've got an event space here, that big doors that open out, and that does community stuff during the day, and then events in the evening. We spend 10 to 30K a month roughly on putting on events that drives footfall to the site so that all the food traders can work. And then this space here is the sort of polytunnel greenhouse space, which is a sort of non-commercialized space. And basically anybody can come in and hang out in here. You don't have to buy anything. We just ask people not to bring food from outside, because that's the food traders, that's kind of their business on the site. So yeah, we're getting about 15 to 20,000 visitors a week. So that's about 1 million people a year. So it's way exceeded the expectations that we had. You know, that was probably a quarter of that was our kind of expectation where we thought we'd get to after 3 or 4 years. And that's been from day one. We've almost been sort of taken aback by the numbers of people and the wear and tear and the extra toilet rolls and all of that kind of thing. It's all got to be paid for somehow. But, you know, I think it's got a really truly mixed cultural offering on site, and it's a real great space for people from Brixton, but for the wider community as well. And we work really hard with our events program, so we've got a whole team of people on site. We've probably got at least 10 people on site full-time running Pop Brixton, so it takes a lot of time and effort to manage these projects. You can't just build the space, you have to actually manage it all really carefully. So we put on a lot of events, from local fashion shows to big music events. And we can get about 1,500 people in the venue, absolute maximum. So obviously we have to be very careful about noise and mindful about neighbours and that kind of thing, but maybe we can talk about some of those problems afterwards. So that was the first project, and I'm just going to move on to Peckham very briefly. So this is probably one of my favourite venues in London, which is the summer outdoor cinema on top of the Bussey building in Peckham. I definitely urge you all to go there if you haven't been. One of the reasons is you get these absolutely amazing views across London, and it gets even better as the light levels drop. So the second project I'm going to talk about is the car park here in Peckham, the multi-storey car park. It's been made famous by Frank's Bar and Bold Tendencies, who run this big arts project, which this was part of the arts project at that time. And I remember it from 5-6 years ago, wandering up through the building, and I think that's what people want from nightlife. In a way, they want a slight sense of edginess, a slight sense of danger, a slight sense of discovery, and like you're the first person to sort of stumble through these places. And I think that's what Bold Tendencies' use of the car park was, you know, that great, slightly sort of, you know, edgy feeling, and you end up on the roof with Frank's Bar. And I think, you know, Bold Tendencies and Frank's Bar, you know, they've put this event on for 5 or 6 years, and they've really helped to transform the perception of Peckham to people from North London especially. But, you know, so yeah, Southwark Council ran a competition a couple of years ago, and it was for all of the space beneath Bold Tendencies and Frank's, so that's going to stay on the roof. And we knew that locally it was called the empty levels, that's what everybody called it, so we called our project Peckham Levels. So it was really in response to communities' opposition to the council's plans to demolish the building and build housing on the site. That's what's in the local plan. The local community really wanted to create, you know, basically a sort of expansion of Bold Tendencies to create a real arts hub in the centre of Peckham. So we won the competition, and it's basically to create about 80,000 square feet of artist studios, maker spaces, event spaces. Very similar in sort of many ways to Pop Brixton, but rather than a sort of container project, it's tackling what some people think is quite an ugly building, but I've come to really love it. It's got Peckham Cinema already at the front of the building as well. It's an amazing, very affordable cinema. It's very well used in Peckham. And we started transforming it earlier on in the year, and you've got these kind of really amazing spaces. And yeah, our scheme was to take on about 5 or 6 levels of the building, starting with a sort of nightclub effectively at the lower levels because of noise issues. we wanted to have it up high where the views were. So we've got a kind of down and dirty, noisy nightclub down here, and then a slightly posher one upstairs to not upset the neighbours. And then gradually we've got a kind of maker spaces and heavier kind of art spaces, and then this is more what we call the creative digital hub floor, so sort of graphic design, that kind of thing. And then this is the public floor, so these are kind of floors for the people that work in the building. This is public, and then this whole floor here is public, and then hopefully we'll be able to link up with bold tenancies when they're open during the summer. So we've got a kind of a forum, a kind of food and bar area. We've got some bigger workspaces, dance studios, recording studios, a gallery, some shops to sell everything that's made in the building, and then this kind of cleaner event space. So really we're trying to do the absolute minimum. We've only got about 3 million to convert the buildings. It's 80,000 square feet. It's quite a task. So we're trying to do just the basics. We've only got a 6-year lease on the building. So again, we've set up an organisation to run it called Peckham Levels. And our smallest units are the size of a car parking bay, which we think is about the size of a 20-foot shipping container, so we know that'll work. But as well as your own space, you'll be able to spill out and use all of the ramps and walkways, so we're going to keep the building really, really raw. You'll be able to still drive a vehicle up all the way through the building. And then we've got some bigger co-work spaces, and then up onto the public floor, so we're going to get the lifts working. You'll come out at this floor and cut some new stairs through, and you'll be able to walk around this whole top floor and get these amazing views across Peckham. So this is a sort of multi-event space. It'll be open 7 days a week, pretty much every day of the year. We just kind of put these visuals together because we're not going to design all the bars. We've now got most of the actual tenants and members on board, and they're all busy designing their own spaces. So again, we have to take a relaxed view in terms of the design. It's not really a design project for us. It's more of a project where we're just bringing this building back into life for a whole series of sort of cultural events and uses. So yeah, this is a kind of forum that we're going to have that can have all sorts of events and a kids sort of mess around area. We're going to have a little insect garden here. So all sorts of activities. And this is where we were on site a few weeks ago. And this is sort of some of the studios going in, but I won't show you. It's nearly finished actually, but I won't show you any much more and give the game away. So I think these I love the graffiti in the building. It's amazing, and I think that one sums it up kind of very nicely. So yeah, should be open by Christmas. Thank you.
Carl, I'm hoping you are holding this all in your head because there's a lot to kind of put together and synthesize for later. Next up is Rollo Maschietto. Is that correctly pronounced? Rollo?
It is.
Yep. Rollo is a project manager with sound diplomacy, which was just touched on a bit earlier. He manages sound diplomacy's work with the GLA and works across music and nighttime economy projects, including the Nighttime Commission, London Music Board, a music venue policy, and working alongside Amy Lamé, who is the Night Czar for London. He also project manages the Night Surgeries programme and recently delivered a feasibility study into the Mayor of London's large-scale.
Hi everyone. Thank you to everyone at the Building Centre for hosting this evening. I am delighted to be here to speak to you about sound diplomacy and in particular the work that we do with the Mayor of London. Music is often taken for granted. It delivers economic growth, job creation, increased tax revenues through spending, tourism growth and cultural development. The systems that enable music to be performed, for musicians to create, for their work to be disseminated, don't magically crop up. They can't survive without a strategy in place. Through cutting-edge analysis and a data-led approach, sound diplomacy advises governments and companies worldwide on policies that deliver economic growth through a vibrant and sustainable music ecosystem. We have decades of experience in the music industry, enabling us to bridge the gap between it and the world of policy and urban planning. This is why we are trusted by organizations around the world to create and deliver strategies for economic and cultural growth and for success in new markets. Now, will this work? Yes. We also work closely with the Mayor of London's music and nighttime economy teams. Now, here's a few statistics about the music and the nighttime economies in our city. London has the world's top-selling artists and most ticketed venue, and music tourism generates £1 billion to London's economy yearly. Music attendance increased by 12% last year, and for every £1 invested in music, £4 is generated. 1 in 8 jobs in London is at night, with a 26 billion nighttime economy forecast to grow by a further 2 billion from today to 2026. Overall, the nighttime economy is worth 66 billion a year to the UK and employs a total of 1.3 million people. Despite all of this, 35% of grassroots music venues have been lost in London in the past 8 years, and 30% of artist studios are likely to be lost by 2019. More than half of the capital's LGBTQ+ venues have closed in the past decade. In late 2015, the Mayor's Music Venues Task Force looked into the decline of grassroots music venues. Their findings and recommendations were published in the form of a report called the Grassroots Music Venues Rescue Plan, we heard a bit about earlier. As the importance of music to cities was being increasingly established, the role of the nighttime economy to a healthy, modern city was also being promoted by academics, journalists, researchers, and politicians. In London, these factors came together and led to City Hall creating a nighttime commission, a London Music Board, and appointing a NISA. The Music Board was set up in April 2016 to protect grassroots music venues and support London's music scene. It is formed by members of the music industry, music education and community music sectors, lots of local authorities and tourism bodies. The mission of the Music Board is to champion London's music scene, protect and promote music at grassroots level, and reclaim London's place as the world's leading music city. It has recently expanded its remit to include young people in education, music tourism, and talent and communities. The London Music Board published an update to the rescue plan in January of this year, which you can find online. Sound Diplomacy helped write and research that. It shows that the number of music venues in the capital has remained stable this year for the first time since 2007. The report also emphasises that although good progress has been made in tackling the challenges facing grassroots music venues, there's still lots to be done in order to sustain the capital, as it is. Throughout this process, Sound Diplomacy has supported the Mayor's Office by providing strategic support, acting as a bridge between the music industry and government, offering legislative and policy advice, and also, as I discovered, the brunt of the admin, which was quite a lot. Okay, here we go. Amy. We also consulted on the appointment of a night mayor, or in this case, due to obvious phonetic issues, a night czar. After a rigorous application process, Amy LeMay was appointed, and having worked with her since then, I've been really impressed by her passion, her expertise, and fearlessness. I feel very, very confident about London's life at night with her at the helm. Here she is at a wall of mirrors in Walthamstow. You can just about see her in London. I wanted to talk briefly about the Night Czar's night surgeries, which were an idea she pitched during her bid to be appointed and that I manage on her behalf. The night surgeries are a great way to talk directly to people who experience London's night culture and nighttime economy. Our plan is to visit every borough in the city and experience life at night there by organising meetings with local people, organisations and establishments. We normally do them on Fridays, meeting around 7 p.m. and staying till our legs can just about still carry us. Nighttime economy hours are normally defined as hours between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., although we quite haven't made it to 7 a.m. yet. We've got pretty close on certain occasions. The night surgeries have given Amy the chance to meet local councilmen and women, businesses, hospital staff, venue operators, firefighters, night shelter volunteers, and many, many more. So far, surgeries have been held in Kingston, Croydon, Waltham Forest, and Hackney, as well as a special surgery that was held to celebrate the opening of the Piccadilly line tube, with stops all the way down the line from Haringey to Hillingdon. These visits help Amy to understand how she can promote a safer, more inclusive and vibrant city at night. This means taking everyone's opinion into consideration. That is why we have organised meetings with night workers and partygoers, but also residents that are just looking for a good night's sleep. As importantly, for London to transition into a fully fledged 24-hour city, we must ensure that those working at night have access to the same conditions as those working during the day. London's late-night cultural offering is hugely important as well, as you can see from this. We visited an industrial estate in Walthamstow, where 3 sites are redefining the area's nightlife and bringing a unique vibe to the neighbourhood. There's a brewery that serves its own beer on the premises, next door to a gym bar whose owner forages for ingredients locally around East London. We even came across a disco yoga session at God's Own Junkyard, which is a bar showcasing a huge array of neon props and signs. Not sure the image does it quite justice, but it was quite something to stumble across. Other European destinations are regularly mentioned as leading examples of 24-hour cities, which I feel is slightly unfair to London. Our capital operates on a much, much bigger scale to, say, cities like Berlin or Amsterdam. With so much going on, it's very easy for things to go unnoticed. The night surgeries allow Amy to unearth some hidden gems, speak with people with experience and interest in life at night, and ensure London is mentioned in the same breath as these other cities. We know that a thriving nighttime economy and culture builds safer, more lively and sustainable communities. And that is what we are working towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Rollo. The night surgery sounded amazing, sort of research repository of information. I can imagine I could do another exhibition when you've done a few more of those and just covering what you're finding. Now to our final speaker, Philippine Nguyen, co-founder, director at Art Night London, which is a free contemporary nighttime arts festival inspired by the international Nuit Blanche movement. And each year, Art Night London partners with a leading cultural institute and curator, focusing on a different area of London. In 2017, it partnered with the Whitechapel Gallery to showcase work throughout East London. So please.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here at the Building Centre and tell you a little bit more about Art Night. So basically, Art Night is really the only arts and cultural offer in London that is truly nighttime. Obviously, we all know the lates, for example, like Tate Lates, but it's usually something that stays open until 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. It is quite hard in London to sort of like shift people's perspective of what the nighttime is and what are the kind of activities you can do during the night, and that it's not only necessarily music or going to a club, but it could be lots of different things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the concept of Art Night, how it all started in London, and how it works sort of internationally, and the different challenges of making something like this happen in a city like London, and also the wide array of social, economic, and cultural impacts of a festival like Art Night. So basically how it all started is 15 years ago in Paris. The mayor's office there decided to create something to sort of promote nighttime culture and the built environment. So they decided to start a free contemporary arts festival that takes place in either unusual venues or public spaces over the course of one night, called Nuit Blanche. And basically my co-founder, Xenia, used to work at the mayor's office in Paris on that same festival. And since 15 years, it was so successful with 1 million people every year in Paris going to Nuit Blanche that it was exported to 30 cities around the world. So as you can see on the map, I mean, there's like lots of different places where Nuit Blanche or similar festival with similar names. It could be White Nights or Art Night. Nuit Blanche means sleepless nights. So it's always the same concept. And now you have very big festivals like this that are in Brussels, in Amsterdam, in Toronto, in Melbourne. And it brings a lot of very positive economic impact for those different cities. So basically, one of the key things that happens is that, because they've done lots of study and research, and when we wanted to bring the Nuit Blanche Festival to London, we also did all that research, and we were thinking of how to sort of make this happen for London, because obviously London is a very different city from any other cities. It has its own specificities, and we didn't want to replicate a model that happens somewhere else for London. We really wanted to be really adapted to London and really about London. In lots of different cities, the main thing that they have realized is that basically it enabled people to reclaim their streets at night. So for example, last time I was at the Nuit Blanche Festival in Paris, it was 3 a.m. and I was going into a disused Court of Appeal to watch a video installation, and in the queue there were lots of people who were 65 years old and above, and they know that there are roughly 15% of the audience at any point during the night who are 60 years old and above, and lots of people who come with also children, families, etc. So it's really a way of discovering your city after hours and thinking that it's for you as well. And in cities like Toronto, for example, there is £19 million economic impact generated by the Nuit Blanche festival there, so that's really a huge impact, which is really important. So basically there's a huge sort of international precedence, but we realized that it had never been done in London, which was really a shame, so which is why we started it here. So obviously we had lots of different challenges. First, how to sort of adapt this model to London. Obviously, London is 40 times bigger than Paris, so it doesn't really make sense to sort of take over the whole city and open all the secret venues and take over all the sort of public spaces. So we decided to work in a way that was that each year we decided to sort of take over one area of London and partner with a renowned cultural institution. So those are images from the first art night, which happened in July 2016 in Westminster and was curated by the Institute of Contemporary Arts. So basically, we presented contemporary art projects in venues very well known like Somerset House or Covent Garden, working with different cultural institutions and developers to stage those events, but also very off-limit sites. For example, we worked with a disused tube platform at Charing Cross. We were able to open Admiralty Arch, which is this crazy building on Trafalgar Square for the first time to the audience in 100 years. We even used a luxury show apartment of a local development to invite a contemporary artist to take over that kind of space. And it was really amazing. We had an amazing response. We had 35,000 people. We were able to work with 30 different partners. But obviously, it was a big challenge for us to do this first year because in terms of nighttime culture, London is doing a lot of work and the GLA is doing a lot of work, but obviously it's quite tricky. We were in Westminster. It was very hard to sort of convince different business owners and different people that the nighttime and nighttime activities can be something that is very positive and brings a lot to London, a lot to an area. They were very wary of, are you going to have lots of drunk people? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be friendly? Is it not going to be too loud or too noisy? So it was really hard to do things actually late. So those festivals in lots of cities around the world, they usually happen from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And in London, the first year, we were able to do 2 a.m., which was already a big challenge in Westminster. But thankfully enough, when we moved to East London the year after, we were quite sad, actually, because for the first art night happened in July, and then the night tube opened a month later, so we were not able to benefit from that. But since then, we've already noticed so much sort of improvement for our activities. Just the fact that we have Amy LeMay, for example, as a night star, that we have the night tube now. It feels like there's so much advocacy that is being done about what the nightlife can offer and what the nighttime economy can bring in terms of economic impact to London, that it becomes easier to speak to different people. And for the second art night, which happened the 1st of July last summer, we were able to open until 4 a.m., which is an improvement. And hopefully next year, when we'll be moving to South London, I can't really announce it yet because we'll be sort of announcing it officially like in a month or so. Hopefully we'll be able to do until 6 a.m. So basically to give you a little bit of an understanding of how Art Night operates, how we work, who we work with, I'm going to go briefly through sort of like the different projects that we put on for Art Night 2017. So basically the idea is to really sort of widen audiences for arts and culture while sort of having more people sort of exploring their city's heritage. So it's a little bit like an open house, but there's lots of things happening inside the buildings that we open to the public. So one of the very, very tricky ones was to use the Bascal chamber that is below Tower Bridge. So basically when you have a bridge lift like here, the chamber here doesn't exist. Whereas when the bridge is closed, it exists. And it's a very, very operational space where we invited an artist to do a sound and light installation. Basically, Tower Bridge, they have to open the bridge to any vessel that asks for it 24 hours in advance. And on the night of Art Night, we were supposed to have 8 bridge lifts, which would have made sort of the whole performance completely impossible. And we were able to sort of negotiate with the different sort of vessel owners, etc., and it was possible to happen. Another project that we did was at St. Catherine Docks, which was also quite tricky to use because obviously St. Catherine Docks is very, very residential. We had to negotiate quite a lot with the owners of the site and with all the different residents doing different consultancies to show them that contemporary arts is something that can bring lots of positive things to the area neighborhood, and it was a very, very successful event where we had basically a contemporary artist taking over the whole of St. Catherine Docks, including a cafe that he transformed into a working cocktail bar. During the night, we served around 3,000 cocktails there. Basically, he has invented an imaginary island called the Islanders, which is inspired by the Isle of Mull, where he's from. And there is a very famous bar in his imaginary island that's called the Egg-Eating Egret, where we were able to it's the image from his imaginary island, and we were able to transform that cafe into a cocktail bar, and then the cafe went back to being a normal cafe the next day at 8 a.m. because we had been able to deinstall everything between 4 and 8. So we took over lots of different areas around East London with sculptures, poster campaign. We also invited Chapman Brothers for different things. So that's a very interesting site, which is in Wapping. It's currently been redeveloped by St. George. It was quite hard to get access and authorization for that site. They were also wary of potential noise disruption, potential issues around that site. It's a listed warehouse where they used to store lots of luxury goods in the Docklands, from silk, feathers, even baby elephants were then dispatched to lots of zoos across the UK. And we were able to present a film installation, and we had Jake Chapman performing live with his band. It was very, very successful. We also took over the Whitechapel Gallery with a music also installation, because we're trying to be very multidisciplinary and bring music, dance, performance, visual arts all together to make sure that we attract as many people as possible. And the great way is that, for example, compared to other contemporary art venues in London, we have roughly 80% of the people who come because they like the fact it's free, because it takes place during the night, or because they want to enjoy and explore those venues, but they have literally don't go to the ICA, don't go to the Whitechapel Gallery, don't really know any of the artists that we actually program, which is really important for us. So we use lots of very, very various sites. So this is the Whitechapel building. It used to be the headquarters for Royal Bank of Scotland, and was bought by Derwent, who transformed it into a space for startups. And we worked with, so we took over the whole atrium there, and we worked with an artist working with digital, who created a virtual reality installation about the future of working, imagining that in 30 years from now, there's no more work and only play because everything has been automated. It was quite something there, and it was really, really amazing to be able to use that space. We also worked with a local housing estate, working with residents over the course of several months to create a special banner that was made with them, where they were able to insert into the banner the different hopes, dreams, and aspiration about London. And then also with Art Night, we're trying to really leave a legacy, because we're a one-night festival, because lots of people, lots of audiences have fear of missing out, so we will attract lots and lots of people to discover contemporary arts. But at the same time, we want to leave something either for the area or for different reasons. So we have more than half of our projects that are new commissions that either are being then donated to join public collections nationwide. So we have works that are joining the Arts Council collection, that are traveling and then will be, for example, in the permanent collection of Leeds Art Gallery. We were able to do a little bit of a makeover on that wall, which is one of the external wall of the estate, which was really run down, and work with street artists to replicate the work that the residents have been doing with the artist on that wall for generations to enjoy. It was actually quite tricky, because the City of London mentioned that we had to do a proper planning application, which is the same planning application as, for example, building a 30-story tower or a massive basement. And it took us a really long time. We had not done that before. It was really challenging. We did it for 6 months, back and forth with lots of different officers at the City of London. And then to realize that actually we were not on time because there was something that they forgot to tell us. So then we decided to be a bit reckless and not to have the planning application, but to do it anyway. And we're really happy that we did, because a few weeks after Art Night, they actually told us that we didn't need a planning application for this. So I mean, that's part of sort of the issues of working with this kind of sort of like public spaces. We also took over the Masonic Temple, which is a really amazing site, which is strangely enough inside a corporate hotel in Liverpool Street, and invited an artist to do a work specifically for that site. We also worked with Joho Soo inside Christchurch Spitalfields, so some very iconic spaces in the area. Another work with Jake and Dinos Chapman inside Danny Sever's house. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's definitely sort of a space to discover. We also took over, I mean, it's really lots of different types of spaces, sort of like vacant building, sort of like quite near a Shoreditch High Street station, where the artist created sort of like immersive installation with light, sound. This is a really special project, which was our biggest for Art Night this year. We worked with an artist named Mélanie Manchot. The work is actually joining the Arts Council collection after. And basically, she invited 10 local dance schools in the East End to work with her to create a major film and a major performance where they sort of all danced a different type of dance. So they were doing either mazurka, salsa, belly dance, Irish dance, tap dancing, and working from their respective dance schools from the street of East London and meeting in this very corporate sort of space, which is at Broadgate, and creating this sort of like silent disco where people could sort of join the celebrations and dance all night with the different dancers. And basically it was quite challenging first to sort of like discuss with British Land and just find, like, get all the support and authorization to just use the site. And then to also just be able to make sure that people would come. Because I don't know if some of you probably have been to Broadgate, but it's very sort of enclosed corporate campus. It's quite hard to find. And we were actually asking lots of street traders if they wanted to come and trade during Art Night, and they were all saying, no, you're not going to have any footfall, we're never going to come there, we won't do that. And then we had 5,000 people across the night, and it was busy, and people were dancing until 4 a.m. So one thing that we realized, because we had 75,000 people for the second Art Night, which is more than double the audience, so we realized actually we had lots of queuing at some venues, at some like very busy sites, which shows that there's like a tremendous appetite for public art and for sort of cultural activities that take place at night, which is something that there's not that much in London. And actually all of the owners, different like property developers, property owners that we worked with as part of Art Night were really, really happy to have taken part. British Land have never seen that many people at Broadgate having so much fun. It was really, really special. At the Whitechapel building with Dawan, they were also very happy. We were able to sort of invite all their sort of new startups, new tenants to interact with the artist, to meet the artist, and to sort of have a special preview of the work. So it really sort of like changes the way some spaces work at night. So that was really, really special. We also did a club night. Basically, we invited a visual artist from Berlin and Boiler Room Berlin to curate a night with artists who are also musicians, DJing throughout the night. It was quite funny of the sort of like culture difference working with Boiler Room Berlin, because they were so shocked that a club could close at 4. And actually Village Underground has a quite late license, so 4 is actually quite late for London. But it's true that working on Art Nights and coming from Paris, I mean, lots of people imagine that Paris is actually more sleepy than London. But when I was in Paris, it was very, very easy to go out at clubs until 7 a.m. and to just have bars open until sometimes 4 a.m. And now they even have clubs that are open 24 hours during the weekend. Whereas moving to London, I realized that actually none of this actually exists in London, which I was very surprised about. So basically, we also did a club night because arts and music also have always had this very sort of like long sort of relationship. So that's roughly what we do. And basically, just in terms of, I mean, data in general, in terms of like social, economic impact, there's something that we do after Art Night every summer is that we commission a big sort of like impact study or a big report, because we are a very new organization, so it's very important for us to see what's our impact, how can we improve, how can we do more. So there's a few things that we were very happy to discover. For example, is that Art Night really helps the sort of mobility between different boroughs. Basically for this edition, we had 25% of the audience that literally never go, have never been to East London, even though they're Londoners, which was quite interesting to see that people were actually traveling and getting sort of out of their comfort zones and discovering different parts of London, which was really important. And then direct economic impact, I mean, you can see some of the data there. If some of you are interested, I would be very happy to share sort of our evaluation report after that talk. Another thing that we thought was really interesting, and I think the GLA is also quite interested in thinking about this, is sort of the strategy for cultural tourism. And for example, we had 15% tourists coming to art nights, and 70% of them actually had planned to go to London for art nights, and some were actually coming for the second time. I was actually very surprised to learn this, but it was very, very positive. So there's a lot of other data about like where do people come from, where they travel from London, and kind of like different types of audiences that we have. Obviously, we had mainly people from Tower Hamlets as a majority, which is great because at the same time we also want to sort of cater for people who are residents and actually live and work in the area. And actually, lots of people also came with public transport. It was really amazing this year to finally have the night tube for people to sort of come. A few sort of like images from art nights. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. And we hopefully will be able to do bigger art nights and to go on as late as possible for next year.
Could you all the speakers move to the panel seats, and we'll have some discussion, I hope. That's fantastic to get all that going and make all that happen. What an incredible sort of release of potential. And across the 5 speakers, really interesting mixture of different ideas about what can happen in night culture. So it's all very positive, but let's try and sort of push at some of the opportunities and challenges and how that works. Because I think right early on with Dipa's presentation, I think, oh, well, what's the problem? We've got this sound challenge, it's great. But then next thing we know, it's going to be closing down. And so it's constant this battle, it seems, around the energy of nightlife activities. And, I suppose the history, actually, even of the wonderful thing you're doing down the road, John, has been a battle. And you've obviously shown some of the issues that rose while you were in the process of developing the plan. So night culture does seem to bring out oppositional forces, and you touched on that they don't tend to work economically. I think you said that, John. They need sort of help in order to sort of make sense of how it can use those sites on a day. So you can't just have a night venue sometimes on its own terms. It has to be part of something more kind of thought through. So I'm wondering. I should have probably prepared you with this question, but put it sort of along all 5 of you. So if you could sort of change one thing that's impacting upon trying to develop night culture, what would that one thing be? What would kind of you trying to sort of bring in place or change or remove or something? Are there some certain obstacles? Are there some planning issues or social issues? Is it the small-mindedness of people, or is it the problem with funding things? I don't know where I want to start that. Perhaps Carl, you've done a couple of developments, or you're in the middle of the second big one.
I think one of the things that creates an issue for nightlife in a weird way is success, and London's become a kind of globally successful city, which means that the value of all the land and the buildings here are suddenly I guess things begin to be seen in a different way, and I think probably when you could say London was at its kind of heyday in terms of anarchy and cutting edge kind of cultural chaos, London was a broken city with a lot of kind of derelict space and a lot of opportunities for people, and I think as it's been cleaned up and regenerated and kind of in many ways, sanitized, that kind of, you're going to get that friction with, land values and people moving probably back into the centre of London as well, and it becoming more of a kind of place where people live. And as soon as everybody wants to live in a vibrant city, but they don't want to live next door to the vibrant bit. So we've had that in Brixton a little bit, but particularly around the car park in Peckham, you get 1 or 2 neighbours who just are not up for it, and suddenly it can block a whole, kind of cultural organisation, and you have to be very flexible and be able to, take people's concerns very seriously and, try and bring people on a journey with you. But, so for instance, we've got groups of people in Peckham who don't want any residential development in the centre of Peckham because they think those apartments will just be full of NIMBYs, will then try and block any kind of cultural activity at all in Peckham. But then obviously on the other hand, we need more housing, we need more social homes, and a lot of those sites are kind of ripe for, you know, densification. So, and you know, I believe in a kind of Jane Jacobs style of mixed use, urban, dense city centre with a whole mix of different uses, but it's kind of hard to make that happen from scratch. It's very difficult to design that. It has to happen organically over a period of time. So I think kind of neglect and dereliction and a bit of a city in turmoil allows those kind of seeds to happen naturally, whereas when it's successful, it sort of tends to block it.
Yeah.
And in a way, that, I mean, the success, it's, for me, it's affordability. It's exactly the same point. But if nighttime uses rely on cheap space, because, you know, there's a risk, isn't there, involved with people, even, you know, the nighttime events are successful because they're free. People, you know, people running clubs and bands and all that, you know, it's all risky. So all the best, I mean, some of my friends from my earlier days started the CLF Art Cafe in the Bussey building because they started it on a shoestring. It was a space that cost nothing. You know, all these derelict buildings are cheap, and then of course the identity comes to the area, and then it becomes lucrative for developers. So it's the affordability. So I think it needs to be built into the local authorities need to be empowered to actually force this affordable space to be there, to be built into the development. Otherwise, it's just everything, you know, just gets obliterated. It's just not viable. They can't pay those kind of rents to have those event spaces. And of course, the soundproofing costs more as well. So all of those things add to the cost and to the unviable and the lack of affordability of that space.
I think can I add to that? I think one of the interesting challenges that this goes beyond. Nighttime economy, goes into residential and public spaces. In London, we have seen, as you have across the country, that the devolution of the key critical services or infrastructure to make a city have been devolved to the private sector. So whilst we can all have a go at developers for not doing what they should be doing, they're doing what they should be doing, which is to make and generate revenue for them or their shareholders. This is where I think both architects but also town planning, which is why what's been going on at that end of the table has been extremely useful. Now, if we believe that culture is important, which I think we probably all agree that, well, that is a centrally driven policy that has to be delivered centrally, in my view. I think we can't just accept that the private sector has to do this, because they don't. They need to be incentivized. They need to be tied in a different way. And I think that's partly where our client was sort of looking at technology and screen time to generate revenue in a different way and not look at them purely as building values. Because if you look at it as building values, a music venue just does not work. And that's where finding different techniques and ways of incorporating it are really important. But that needs GLA, it needs council input to help put and stitch that together. I think that's the big change that's happened.
Has your client made some rather unusual decisions then in terms of the economics of it, or does it somehow stack up?
Well, it's the screen time.
Yeah.
He's able to rentalise the screens throughout the passage of the day, and also through the use of the screens we can have more flexible uses in some of the below ground spaces. So it takes away some of that dead element, and it's not just reliant on ticket prices, how many drinks or food on that particular event. So he's had to sort of look at, well, if I look at it a traditional way, it's very difficult to stack up, but if I can supplement it in many different ways, suddenly it gives you...
Sort of slightly new take on Piccadilly Circus in a way. You've got these amazing ways of projecting sort of things and making a destination that's around the communication in that space at times.
Yeah, so Piccadilly is a static one-off thing. Once you've bought your screen time, that's it. Whereas in many respects, it's about local businesses and local people interacting with those screens, and it's changing throughout the day. Piccadilly Circus, once you've gone there, you've seen it. That's it. Whereas the whole idea is that this can be somewhere you return to throughout the day. So flexibility and adaptability has been key to generating and looking at value in a slightly different way.
Rollo, I was wondering about the new mayor, newish, and the mayor of London, and the stat you came out with about there wasn't sort of further decline in venues last year. Are we seeing something different starting to happen that's holding these places and building?
Well, I would say that since we've been working with the music board, it actually seems as though once you put out one fire, another one reappears. I think that what's important to stress really is to look at the makeup of these businesses that work at night, these cultural practices. A lot of them just tend to be quite small businesses, especially grassroots music venues don't really put profit as their kind of the thing that they want to achieve. It's all about kind of putting on great music, giving emerging bands a platform, which obviously means taking quite a few financial risks. As soon as anything affects their profit and loss sheet marginally, any sort of fluctuation, that can mean that a lot of them suffer from a risk of closure. And I think the rise in business rates recently has been a really difficult time for a lot of venues. We published a report recently that showed that 30% of grassroots music venues are now in further risk because they can't afford this rise in business rates. And out of those 30%, I think at least 80% of those would either have to shut or completely change the type of music and the type of strategy that they have. So, yeah, I think that is...
Is there any sort of action that's being proposed to sort of counter that?
Yeah, well, because that is more a government decision, it's more about kind of lobbying DCMS and those kind of bodies there. But a plan is in place, and hopefully we can do something about it.
Philippine, do you want to come in on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting because, I mean, it's not really about the music venues, but we've come across similar things about closures when doing art nights. So basically, art night we sort of like plan sort of a year. It takes us a year approximately to deliver the festival. And that sounds like not a very long time, but we see how areas change so much in just a year. There's something that we do on Parallel of Art Night because for the second edition we were approached by lots of different organizations, either local businesses, independent curators, independent artists, local galleries, saying can we do something, can we take part in art nights? So we have sort of parallel program, sort of collection of fringe events that we had around 60 this year. So we had so many different organizations taking part in art nights. And by the time we were printing in the program all those different fringe events, we had around 3 galleries that had to shut down in just really a couple of months, and that is really crazy that this can happen so quickly. Even in our official program, we were supposed to work with Brian Eno and to take over the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, which is the longest trading business in the UK, and they have been making bells in Whitechapel in central London for 500 years. And we were sort of like, we had met with the owner, he was very excited, we were supposed to do a project. And then we just realized quite late in the day that they had to sell and that an anonymous buyer was taking over the premises in April, so 3 months before Art Nights. And as the buyer wanted to remain anonymous, we were not even able to sort of approach him and see if we could do something there. So, I mean, it's something that I really understand, and obviously we don't work primarily with music, but lots of local art galleries have the same issues in terms of just having to close down and having to not even being really able to relocate. Sometimes they just move to Berlin, basically.
Chance for you to ask a question. Anybody with a question they want to bring forward?
Okay. Hi, Gianluca Memoli, University of Sussex. I had a question. So you told us a story about how having an event in a public space impacted on the people who wanted that not in my garden. But do you feel that enlarging the night culture has an effect on the rest of the day? Let me call it that way. So do you feel that running an event in a space has an effect on the people who live around on the other hours of the day?
Well, I mean, I think that there's definitely sort of an impact on sort of local people and businesses by doing an event of that scale in London. One thing that is, I think, quite positive is that by doing a large-scale festival like this, it sort of brings an area together. So by working on Art Night in one particular area, we work with the local authorities, we work with the business improvement districts, we work with different sort of community centers, we work with different sort of people who live and work locally, we work with different businesses in retail or hospitality, we work with cultural businesses, so it's really sort of like bringing everyone around sort of the same table with this sort of like shared goal of delivering something that is of value for sort of the neighborhood. And it's quite interesting because when we were working, for example, the second year we were working with Whitechapel Gallery as our main sort of institution, and we realized that there were very little that they knew actually about the immediate local area. And when we met, for example, the person in charge of arts and culture at Tower Hamlets, she had not been to the Whitechapel Gallery. And there's like lots of things that we realized was like problems like in terms of like dialogue or in terms of like people really actively sort of working together. So I think that it sort of like has this sort of impact for sort of everyone that is in an area to know that, for example, we were really able to sort of like foster new relationships, whereas now some developers that we work with now realize that actually there's lots of interesting cultural organizations in the area and they wanted to speak to the Whitechapel Gallery and maybe do more arts and culture in the area. So hopefully, we think that hopefully beyond the one night, we were able to sort of like leave a mark to the area we were working with. I mean, I'm not really sure if that answers your question.
I mean,
I was going to ask you, Carl, because you've kind of got this program of night stuff, which obviously is part of a rounded 24 hours.
I mean, the way I view it is that we need cultural infrastructure in the same way that we need physical infrastructure, and often with physical infrastructure, the need of the many overrides the needs of a few, and that might sound quite hardcore, but I think that's, ultimately, if you want peace and quiet, don't live in a city. That's the kind of like hardline stance, but, on the other hand, on a kind of micro level, we are extremely sensitive and try and be really, really helpful with the people that live around sites. And for instance, when we first opened Pop Brixton, we had like one guy complained regularly about noise, and when we actually went and spoke to him, it wasn't the venue because we've got sound limiters on the machines. It was actually after midnight when everybody had gone home, the food traders were going and tipping all the bottles into the recycling bins, and it was actually the bottle noise that was really annoying him. So we just kind of reprogrammed that and did it in the morning rather than at night, and then he was happy. So quite often it's just those kind of particular things about just, figuring things out. And in Peckham, we effectively restacked and redesigned the building the way that we thought we'd use it to try and avoid some of those issues so that we could kind of bury the really noisy bits pretty much below ground in a bunker. But I think it's impossible to not upset somebody all of the time, and I think we do need it like infrastructure, because otherwise the city will become less attractive to live in, and you need stuff that happens at night that's exciting and a bit edgy as well, I think, definitely.
And that's why within the build-to-rent environments, they are encouraging that, because they know that people do want to live somewhere that is lively, that is attractive to visitors. So your friends will come and visit you for a party, for an event, for a pop-up venue, and then they might want to live there. So it's kind of, it's attractive in a commercial sense, as well as offering a better quality of life to the residents.
Do you think it's important, that build-to-rent model? Because then, I was just talking to somebody who's big in this area, and they have a long-term interest in managing the thing they've built. It's not just flogging off all these flats.
Absolutely.
Then you've got all these little people, well, normal-sized people, but little flats. Everybody's got their own bit of space they want to defend, and it becomes a kind of dormitory, really, rather than a community, whereas the build-to-rent developer, who still has to manage it, wants to manage a successful community, clearly, and so they do sort of see the more complex mix.
Yeah, that's why it's so different from a for sale development, because a for sale development has no interest in curating events or providing that kind of space, whereas a rental facility, the institutional manager of that development wants to make a lively space.
So can you see sort of them making that investment in the box-in-the-box type stuff to make actually venues that are soundproofed underneath housing and things, and Is that sort of
Yeah, I mean,
feasible?
there is that going on at Walthamstow. They actually are creating, an event space which can be used at night, can be used for all sorts of events, and it is, soundproof. And yeah, I think there it definitely is.
Next question. No?
So yeah, kind of touching on that and going back to what you said at the beginning about being a custodian of culture, and I was wondering about who gets to be the custodian of culture, because it seems to me that a lot of these kind of built to rent regeneration projects seem to me kind of like student halls with a kind of student union in the basement that offers activities for the community, but it tends to be a certain kind of homogenous, fairly wealthy community which is quite footloose, and that built to rent model, if you're encouraging people to vote with their feet and move around, that works against the idea of having a sort of stable grassroots community which you actually need for like a rich cultural development. And I wonder if those two things kind of work against each other in some ways. And I guess related to that also, the spaces that are built in these projects are commercial spaces, they're privately owned, and although even on public land we don't have a right to like a right of assembly in the UK, it limits what you can do if the site is owned privately as opposed to owned like by the state or by a cooperative, by the community.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You're right. It isn't as good as the local venue that's run by local people, but it's an offering, and because the people vote with their feet. But likewise, the intention, for instance, with legal in general, the intention is to have longer leases so that people will have 2 or 3 year leases and want to stay there. And so it is supposed to be attractive for a longer term tenant. And similarly, although the tenants change, the operator will remain the same. So there could be, and obviously we're in infancy of all of this yet, but there could be, if we're talking about local bands, for instance, or local activities, that there is an outreach to actually attract local talent and local people to actually be able to use those spaces. So there is hope there, although it is commercial and it is in its infancy, but it's there for the taking, I think.
You mentioned the kind of community ownership idea. Good examples of that actively going on at the moment, sort of where people banding together to take ownership and protect a venue or create a venue?
Passing Clouds, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Although that is now shut. But that was, I guess, a proto-version of a community-led space. There's obviously lots of examples of it in Berlin. There's a club called the Bau Blank, which is run as a kind of cooperative in that respect. It's not something we've come across that much in London. But going back to the earlier point, I would say that the best culture doesn't really come out of kind of organisations or schemes. So for me, really, it's about trying to understand what these type of people need at the very beginning and trying to help them in that respect, as opposed to opening up spaces that perhaps they don't see as being useful to what they want to say or want to do.
So does that involve, well, you're not going to give them the space, it's not that easy for them, but you have to do something to make it easier for them. What is it that you facilitate?
Well, one thing, I guess, that we were talking about developments earlier, which I think can become very important, is a kind of a future planning idea called the Agent of Change, which is something that the Mayor is supporting very heavily. And that was in a recent government white paper on kind of future planning ideas, which is the idea that if a venue goes into a residential area, then the onus is on the venue to provide soundproofing and any other sort of issue around dispersal and other kind of noise disturbances that might arise. However, if it's a development being built next to an existing club, then the onus is on the development to either put the bedrooms as far away from the club as possible or use soundproofing in an intelligent way. So I think that's kind of a way of helping venues and culture to survive, is not kind of giving them spaces and telling them, here you go, we're going to do this. It's more about kind of working on a more legislative and policy level to strengthen what it is that they want to do.
Okay, that question and then this one.
Hello. My question is about the role of sound and noise. And I think that, in my opinion, it's kind of two different approaches. So traditionally, there is too much emphasis on noise mitigation, and probably we will need to be more innovative on the strategies for noise mitigation and noise insulation. But that always drives noise as a very negative thing for the nighttime. And my question is about what is the scope for sound as a positive approach? So noise is a waste, sound is a resource. And for example, embracing approach for soundscapes or sound planning at nighttime via sound walks, or trying to I don't know, mix the agenda of creating nighttime economy by a hand of soundscapes at night, or planning the space for the nighttime, but as well as for the daytime, of course.
I mean, I would definitely say that noise is the #1 issue to creating well-rounded 24-hour cities. But I think, and this is probably not the best place to say, but I also think that culture is kind of monopolizing the conversation on what a 24-hour city is. And I think it's important to remember that there are people who work at night, people who just want to sleep at night. So I think it's important to just find a balance. And we think of cities like Berlin and Amsterdam as being cities that are always awake, always doing stuff, but actually it's actually just kind of well-policed pockets of those cities that are done very, very well. And, you know, London is obviously a bit behind, but you can go to Fabric from Friday night to Monday morning if you want. They will be doing their birthday in October where you can actually do that. So there are examples of times when you can stay out all night and do all the things you want to do. So, yeah.
Trying to do things better in Berlin or Amsterdam or somewhere else where they police it, they manage it, the whole thing better?
Well, I just think that they have more of a symbiotic relationship between being out and also having a balance of people wanting to just relax at night and sleep. I just think that there's a better understanding of club culture, of being out, of what that entails, that perhaps here in London there isn't, and maybe that's a reputational thing as well. There's still some bad connotations to the night here in London, even though crime is as prevalent in the day as it is at night. And London is actually one of the safest cities to be as a kind of on a 24-hour basis. So yeah, I think that's it.
I think that there's some really interesting issues. I think the idea of sound being used in a more positive way is a really interesting idea. The reason that we're focused on noise is that is one of the single biggest issues that even on St Giles we've faced, is that if you don't deal with the noise, you ain't getting anything. And it has got a negative connotation. But I also think that was also tied in with, if you want to create a sort of a venue on a world standing, it has to meet certain sound criteria as well as dealing with the noise. And I think that this idea that at the moment we're dealing with issues to try and make things happen is not about we have a cultural voice that says that we have to have this really rich mix of nighttime, daytime economy. It's some people are trying to push the way, and there's just layer and layer and layer of stuff that's in the way. And I think this is where the Music Venues Trust, what the GLA are doing, to try and move some of those layers. But I think coming back to the point that I would make is that culturally, from the mayor and from the government, we've got to be saying we need these spaces. It needs to be a rich part of how a city evolves, just as much as residential needs to be. And we can't just silo these things off. It needs to be seen as a joined up piece of thinking. And I think that's where London has got to a point where it's become more and more and more fragmented as we become more and more privatised.
Question here?
Thank you. It's just really to build upon the point that the gentleman said just now. Whilst I appreciate that the buy-to-let scheme and the scheme that you're involved in is actually trying to do something, and I appreciate there's problems with money, etc., I'm slightly sort of concerned because how could you guarantee, for example, that those flats would remain to let and not to be bought? Because I start thinking immediately of somewhere like the Barbican, which I believe was originally supposed to be some sort of social housing, but ends up being an estate that's then bought. And I appreciate that the Barbican is a wonderful art centre, but actually if you wander around that estate at night or out of order, it's quite dead as a centre. And culture, to me, the trouble is if we're losing places like Denmark Street, if we're losing venues in Soho, etc., culture is about being rough and ready. It is about a lot of independent places. So I suppose there's two things that I'm saying. That first of all, perhaps it strikes me that those two places are a bit corporate, a bit over-curated, I don't know. And secondly, could you guarantee that that company is going to maintain its buildings for let and not eventually get bought?
I think, well, the thing with the and you've actually said buy-to-let, which is an interesting thing because it's completely not that. So the idea with the build-to-rent is that institutions procure that development and manage that development for the longevity, and that's the idea. Obviously, we don't know if that will, if they are going to decide after 5 or 10 or 20 years to sell it, but the way that they're being designed and operated is that they do manage those. So, for instance, Legal & General pension company, they're now starting. I know it's very corporate, but they are starting to invest pension money into these developments. So that's a long-term investment for them, and they are going to be running. And it's based on the American model, and it's a culture shock, or it's a culture change for this country, for people to be renting for longer and to be actually offered a good quality product to rent. So they're not renting off individual landlords as in the past. They're renting off an institutional. So yes, they become the custodian of the culture of those developments. And I mean, the precedent in the States is that they do have quite interesting and quirky. They can actually subsidise, pop up, individual independents to come and do their their events or sell their wares, whatever, in those spaces. So they just, it becomes that kind of mixture of the local independent managed by the corporate. In the same way that, some of the bigger developments are managed and run by some of the more philanthropic, developers who value placemaking. It's the value of placemaking that we have from those developers, as with local authorities. And one of the things I'd like to see is we used to have a 1% for art in planning, in a Section 106 planning agreement, and that kind of got dropped. And we should bring back a percentage for culture, and that's something that I think the mayor should put into his cultural strategy. Actually encouraging local authorities to actually put their foot down and say, put back some, give a percentage in each development, each new development, for a cultural offer, because it has to be curated, I think, overall by local authorities to coerce the private sector to do it.
Can I come back on the Denmark Street part of your question? What the music and especially Denmark Street is a hugely sensitive subject. I think music is an emotive subject because it has the experiences that are very personal to that person or that group of people that may have been to see their first gig or seen somebody very prominent in that space. What we are trying to do is that one part of the site was cleared for Crossrail, so where the new buildings were cleared as part of those works. We've actually got an opportunity where technology, and this has been replayed back to me by a number of the music people that have been involved in. Technology has changed music and changed music over the last 10, 15 years. That has actually led to some of the issues that have happened on Denmark Street and where some of those venues have gone. What we like the idea of is that if the technology is in the new buildings, and if that technology in the new buildings can actually help the previous heritage to survive and thrive, well, if you just want to go to Denmark Street and have the older music heritage, you don't just come to the front of the site, or you can do it from either side. So we've almost got old next to new music next to old music, and that idea that they actually come together on one site is what is fascinating. So the music has changed. So can new technology actually help the heritage of that street survive? And that is where a lot of our scheme has come from. So it's not to drive out the old the music shops or the instrument shops. We want those as independents in there, and those leases are being renewed and renegotiated right now. But we want that to be alongside a different approach to how music can be displayed and seen. So Denmark Street, you used to have people who wrote music knocking on doors saying, no, here, listen to this piece of music, and they were then placed with artists. Imagine if technology can embrace that. If you arrive from around the world and the screens are your welcome to music, it could happen on either side of the site. That's where we think that the exciting opportunity is. It's not that the new buildings are replacing the old heritage. We're trying to put them alongside each other. And that's the bit that we found difficulty in, because a number of people don't want to hear that, because they think all of the old bits are going, and they're not. So I think old can stay alongside new. It's not one replacing the other. I think it's how you make that mix work that is really, really challenging.
Is there a question back here? Just through back there. We need to make this the last.
Brian Hoy, Connor Beer, Phillips Architects. First, to acknowledge the point about that things seem to work from Carl about things working in a state of dereliction, but of course you can't kind of desire that state, so the success puts barriers in the way. And my question is sort of related to how the venues have been competing with developments in terms of owning space and being permanent and being fixed venues. And we had all the list of venues which have closed down, which probably don't have a means to compete. We talk about the business model being too risky and it not being attractive to developers for the risk puts a barrier down there. And then we also heard the success stories about the new interim uses and temporary things, and I suppose the fact that developers didn't want, there was concerns about going in on a music venue in St Giles Circus, but then all of the statistics that we heard about the movements of sound diplomacy stuff and the economic benefits that investing in music brings. And it's weird, it seems like there's the barrier is that the model is not competing for space, competing for ownership of space is not working for music venues. But at the same time, in this shift between owning permanent spaces and having events, which so if events are working and clubs are closing, is the next step to just kind of move to what, because the success of the St Giles's Circus development was almost a bit of a manifestation of some of the temporary flexibility, adaptable ideas, with the screens. So even in a permanent development, what was underwriting that success was a change in thought towards the flexible and the more transient. And is it dangerous to view a shift in that direction as a solution? Because if we allow all the kind of fixed permanent centres of culture to close, is that a step to extinguishing nightlife, or is that a step to the solution, which is to be more transient and flexible and to use interim spaces and agreements, and even back to how that came out with the solution being to drop the bottles off at a different time? It seems about scheduling and time management rather than space ownership. And I wonder, if you, as experts, have concerns about that shift from permanence to a different model.
Okay, so quite a big question, but well, I'm sure answers
Sorry.
from all of you. Okay.
I think there's an interesting, you could say high culture and low culture, and seems like high cultural venues are protected, and low culture, which is popular music venues, generally haven't been protected because they kind of revolved around pubs and kind of privately owned bars, and so they may have been thought to be sort of cultural importance, but they're actually mainly in private ownership. But I think in many ways I don't think we should be too concerned, because I mean, when I came to London 30 years ago, Soho was the place to go out, and quite frankly, I can't remember the last time I went to Soho for a night out. It would be years ago. Soho, then Farringdon, Clerkenwell, Shoreditch, Hackney, Hackney Wick, Clapton, Brixton, Peckham. It's kind of spread outwards, and the next generation of people coming through, they want to find their own space and their own point where they want to be and doing the thing that they want to do, and they don't want to be spoon-fed into, kind of being forced into a particular sort of set of cultural values. So I think it's really difficult to, in a way, I don't think we should try and push back too much on those spaces, because, new venues will open, new opportunities will arise, and, maybe London will go into a tailspin and become a bit of a wreck again in 15, 20 years' time, and then we'll go round again on the circle again. So, I'm quite optimistic, really. I think it's a central. We're quite optimistic there.
For the energy.
Yeah, I think in central London, it's changed, and it's maybe that kind of venue, except for things that John's kind of working on to try and replace that kind of venue. But those kind of those venues have naturally kind of disappeared, but other ones have popped up in other places. And Peckham's hot right now.
Yes, indeed.
I think the interesting point that we're seeing this across different sectors. So forgive me using workplace and retail as other examples. What we're hearing is that the experience that you create in this ever changing, accessible digital world that we live in, the experiences are changing. Not in sort of 10, 15, 20 years time. It's like 12, 18 months. And I think the idea of having flexible spaces that can use technology to change as those desires and experiences are changing, I think that is a positive place to put music venues. And I think this may be part of where the challenge has been, is that they have been, they are, and I go back to the emotional, they are attached to a certain generation. There's a new generation coming through that wants constantly evolving experiences. And if you can't provide it, I'm going to go somewhere else. And if you can't provide it, I'm going to Berlin. No, it doesn't actually matter. It's no longer, it's my community, because the community is now huge. It's not just your local community. So is the idea of creating that flexibility and interaction, I think is a fascinating challenge, because I think the music venues or events venues are going to constantly evolve themselves. Retail is doing it as we speak. If you look at some of the new stores in America, New York, they are way ahead of where we are in terms of that experience and interaction with technology. I'm with Carl. I wouldn't be afraid of it. I think it's more important to have it in the centre of London, and if we can find ways of doing that, I think we should do what we can.
Okay.
And they're equally important to have locally. And that's the other thing, isn't it? People are looking more to their local community, to their local areas. It's not always about taking that trip into, it's offering different experiences to different people, and having also, people are doing different things now, so maybe everybody doesn't want to go out to crazy, rock and roll noisy venues. People they go to microbreweries now, and they do morning brunch yoga sessions, don't they? They do all sorts of different types of experience.
Flash mobbing.
Yeah.
Don't even know what it is, but I know it happens.
Maybe it's
okay,
good.
I think I probably should put it to close to a bit past time, and I know we've got to get out of the building at some point. I'd like to thank you all for coming and for asking some great questions, and I hope you enjoyed the presentations. I certainly have. I think across the 5 speakers, we've done a rather wonderful sort of survey of different directions, different ideas, current and future things, and I feel quite optimistic in some ways about music. So I'd like to thank the speakers. Round of applause.